Have you ever wondered why your kids can't resist that sugary cereal, those neon-colored gummy bears, or even that fizzy soda that seems to whisper, "Drink me"? Is it just because kids love sugar, or is there a calculated strategy behind it? What if I told you this sweet addiction is no accident? That's right, recently, some of the world's biggest food corporations have been sued for allegedly designing their products to hook children from the first bite. But is this just another lawsuit, or are we peeling back the layers of something much darker? Ultra-processed foods. What are we really eating? Did you know the same companies that hook millions on cigarettes use their expertise to make our food addictive? In the 1980s, Big Tobacco took over major food brands like Kraft, Nabisco, and General Foods. Using advanced brain research, they applied their cigarette playbook to food, designing ultra-processed products that exploit our cravings and keep us hooked. The same scientists who studied nicotine addiction helped create foods engineered to be irresistible. Coincidence? Hardly. Let's start with a question. What exactly are ultra-processed foods? Are they just regular foods with a little extra flavoring? Not quite. These are industrial concoctions filled with ingredients that sound more like they belong in a chemistry lab than a kitchen. Maltodextrin, sodium nitrite, and of course, everyone's favorite villain, high fructose corn syrup. Ultra-processed foods now make up over 60% of the American diet. Children derive 70% of their daily calories from these foods. And here's the kicker. These foods are engineered to be hyper-palatable. Translation? They're designed to light up your brain's reward system like a Christmas tree, making it almost impossible to stop eating them. Sound familiar? That's because it's eerily similar to how addictive substances work. Health impacts, a silent epidemic. Since the 1980s, as UPFs dominated our diets, we've seen an explosion in obesity and diseases like fatty liver disease, something once confined to elderly alcoholics. Today, it's as common in children as asthma. Type 2 diabetes, once unheard of in kids, is now a frequent diagnosis in pediatric clinics. These aren't random developments. They're directly tied to the rise of these so-called foods. UPFs meet the same criteria that make cigarettes addictive, triggering compulsive use, cravings, and psychological dependency. Now let's connect the dots. As ultra-processed food consumption has skyrocketed, so have childhood obesity rates. Coincidence? Hardly. Studies show a direct link between these foods and a laundry list of health issues: obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and even mental health disorders like anxiety and depression. Childhood obesity rates have tripled in the last 4 decades. Children who consume high amounts of sugar and artificial additives are more likely to experience hyperactivity and attention issues. But here's a fact that should keep you up at night. Scientists have even found a correlation between ultra-processed foods and cancer. Yep, cancer. A recent study linked a 10% increase in consumption of ultra-processed foods to a 12% higher risk of developing certain cancers. Still think this is just about harmless snacks?
This shocked me, actually. 67% of calories kids eat come from ultra-processed foods. That's 2/3 of all the calories that they consume. That is mind-blowing. So what is an ultra-processed calorie? Well, it's the industrial grains, all the processed grain products you see in the grocery store. We have the sweet snacks, the ready-to-eat and the ready-to-heat foods, foods high in added sugar, foods with trans fats, refined starches like modified food starch, for example. Now, most of these foods are very, very high in carbohydrates, but without very many nutrients. So you have this situation where you have high oxidation. That's like rusting out the inside of the body without any antioxidants that are supposed to protect all this free radical damage. So this is where the heart disease comes in the artery. This is where you can be at risk for getting cancer, and especially diabetes. Now, the problem with diabetes is that normally you're going to have high insulin, which the doctors are never going to check, for probably 20 years or 25 years before the blood sugars even go up. So diabetes takes a long time to develop. And when you're developing this condition, a lot of times you don't even know it's brewing in the oven until it's in the later stages. Now, most of these calories are not eaten at home. It's out of the house, fast food restaurants.
the long-term impact of ultra-processed foods on society. But let's zoom out for a moment. What happens when an entire generation grows up on ultra-processed foods? The consequences go far beyond individual health. Consider this. The healthcare costs associated with obesity and related diseases are staggering, estimated at over $190 billion annually in the US alone. And it doesn't stop there. Studies show that poor nutrition during childhood can impact cognitive development, leading to lower academic performance and reduced earning potential later in life. Basically, we're not just feeding our kids unhealthy snacks, we're feeding a cycle of systemic inequality. Now here's the kicker. Many of these ultra-processed foods are disproportionately marketed to low-income families. Why? Because they're cheap, convenient, and easy to access. It's no coincidence that the areas with the highest rates of fast food consumption also have the highest rates of poverty and health disparities. Low-income neighborhoods have 40% more fast food outlets than wealthier areas. Children in food-insecure households are more likely to consume ultra-processed foods and suffer from chronic health conditions. And let's talk about the environmental impact for a second. Ultra-processed foods are often packaged in single-use plastics and shipped across long distances, contributing to the growing crisis of plastic pollution and carbon emissions. So not only are these foods harming our bodies, they're harming our planet too. Let's recap. Ultra-processed foods are fueling a public health crisis, perpetuating economic inequality, and accelerating environmental destruction. Is it any wonder people are starting to call this an epidemic? The marketing machine targeting kids. Big Tobacco didn't stop at making foods addictive. They also targeted kids and minorities, the most vulnerable among us. One executive famously boasted, "We've decided to focus our marketing on kids where we know our strength is the greatest." With brightly colored packaging, kid-friendly mascots, and relentless advertising campaigns, they knew exactly how to hook the next generation of consumers. Here's where it gets truly sinister. The marketing. These companies aren't just selling food, they're selling an experience, a brightly colored, cartoon-laden promise of happiness and fun. And who's their target audience? Children, of course. Because if you hook them young, you've got a customer for life. The food industry spends over $1.8 billion annually marketing to children in the US. Children see an average of 10 to 12 food ads per hour of TV watched. But how did they make these foods so addictive? The same MRI machines used to study cures for addiction were repurposed to engineer ultra-processed foods to hijack our brain's reward systems. Imagine using cutting-edge neuroscience, not to heal people, but to keep them coming back for more chips, sodas, and candies. It's science, but not the kind that helps humanity. It's the kind that lines corporate pockets. And let's not forget how they use psychology to their advantage. Ever noticed how cereal boxes are placed at a child's eye level in grocery stores? Or how the mascots on the boxes are designed to make direct eye contact? That's not a coincidence. It's a tactic. Past lawsuits, big food in hot water. In 1999, CEOs of the biggest food companies held a secret meeting in Minneapolis. At this meeting, they admitted their products were driving obesity, especially among children, costing the US $100 billion annually and causing public health damage rivaling tobacco. One executive even asked, "Can the trial lawyers be far behind?" But instead of changing course, they doubled down on their tactics, proving once again that profit comes first. This isn't the first time big food has found itself in court. Remember these cases? 2013, General Mills was forced to settle over false natural claims on fruit roll-ups. 2021, Post Foods paid $15 million over claims about added sugar in its cereals. 2022, Kellogg's faced backlash for misleading health claims on frosted mini-wheats. And let's not forget the parallels to Big Tobacco. Just like the tobacco industry was accused of knowingly making their products addictive, food companies are now under fire for using similar tactics. The difference? This time, it's our kids who are the victims. Conspiracy Corner. Is it all about profit? Now let's put on our tin-foil hats for a moment. What if this isn't just about profits? What if there's a larger agenda at play? Think about it. Ultra-processed foods are cheap to produce, have long shelf lives, and create lifelong customers. What better way to control a population than by keeping them addicted, unhealthy, and dependent on pharmaceuticals to manage the consequences? Am I suggesting that food companies are in cahoots with Big Pharma? Not necessarily, but isn't it interesting how these industries seem to benefit from each other's success? Solutions. What can we do? So what's the solution? How do we protect our kids from a system that seems stacked against them? Awareness is the first step. Educate yourself and your children about what's really in their food. Push for transparency and accountability from these corporations. And whenever possible, opt for whole, unprocessed foods. Shop the perimeter of the grocery store, where fresh produce and unprocessed foods are typically located. Read ingredient labels. If you can't pronounce it, don't eat it. Advocate for stricter regulations on marketing to children. And here's the harsh truth. Even so-called healthier, ultra-processed foods are dangerous. It's not just about the fat, sugar, or salt. They harm us because of the very nature of their processing. Studies show that even after accounting for nutritional content, ultra-processing itself increases the risks of diseases like obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. You can't outsmart the system by picking a low-calorie option. The system is rigged. Our kids deserve better. They deserve a future where their health isn't sacrificed for corporate profits. So the next time you reach for that brightly colored box of cereal, ask yourself, who's really benefiting? Subscribe to Veil of Time for more deep dives into the hidden truths that shape our world.